So right now, Senator Smith is going to introduce one of our candidates for the Ohio Secretary of State position. And we want to thank him for coming, and he really is great. He's not running right now, but we really want to support him and sign up for his Facebook posts because they're really, really great. Senator?
Thanks. Oh, but I am running right now. I'm running for re-election.
Sorry.
To the Ohio Senate in 2026. I actually have Democratic opposition. I had Democratic opposition in 2022. It was a Democrat in name only. And Americans for Prosperity funded their campaign, and we got outspent, and we still won with over 61% of the vote. So I've beaten the Koch brothers once. I'd appreciate your help so I can beat them again, because it looks like they're going to try to do the same thing. All right, so you remember the story I just told you? The leader at that point was Allison Russo, who I'm now about ready to introduce. She was the one that kept us there until 6 in the morning, and I will never forgive her for that. Just kidding. I love Allison Russo. So she's the former minority leader of the Ohio House of Representatives. She was the first Democrat in a decade to flip a central Ohio seat that had been one of the reddest seats in Franklin County, and she flipped it. She's one of the state's leading voices on healthcare access, protecting workers' rights, and election integrity. Since entering the legislature in 2019, she's authored and co-sponsored dozens of bills signed into law, steered bipartisan reforms through the Republican supermajority, and helped build grassroots coalitions. She helped defeat the story that I just told you, the August 2023 issue on power grab, which preserved citizen-led direct democracy. She helped enshrine reproductive freedom in the Ohio Constitution, the largest single-issue victory for voters in Ohio history. She's expanded mental health care, parity protections, veteran services, the historic Fair School Funding Plan that you'll hear more from the original author, co-author, John Patterson. She's expanded access to child care services for working families. Before elected to the Ohio House, Allison spent more than 20 years working to solve real problems in healthcare, advising federal agencies, decision makers, and healthcare systems as to how to improve care for seniors, veterans, military families, and vulnerable communities. And she's earned national recognition for her work on mental health and early childhood aging and disability issues. I'm very happy to have her have my support. But now I think we've got somebody to introduce Bryan Hambley, right? Okay.
Carl Seltzer from Lake County is going to introduce Bryan Hambley, our other candidate for Secretary of State.
All right, not a lot of you know who I am. I am going to ask, can I get 20 seconds since Senator Smith got 20 seconds to talk about his re-election? So I grew up in a doomsday cult, and we believed in quiverful, which meant have as many kids as you could. The average family had 7 kids. The most were 2 families, 13 and 14 children. So multiply that times 16. And that's actually what the Republicans are doing, because they don't have 2 kids at the ideological level, they have 7 to 14. And so times $16,000, that's a lot of donation money. Now can my clock start? All right, so 5 years ago, you all woke up in a post-January 6th haze, because you saw what could be an insurrection in America, but we also realized that our institutions are more than brick and mortar. 5 years ago, I woke up in a Chinese medical concentration camp, stripped of all of my dignity and all of my rights. By the time I came home, I was more broken than I ever believed a human being could be, because I realized I had more rights than we talk about, and I didn't really know that until they were taken away from me. So I've taken the last 5 years to figure out, okay, how can I help, and where are the rays of hope? And one of the rays of hope that I've found in the state of Ohio is Dr. Bryan Hambley. And so he decided a year ago, without the blessing of any institution or any organization in the state of Ohio, that he was going to run for Secretary of State. He's going to explain his story. I want you to know why it has inspired me. Because he saw the potential effects, not only on his family, but on America as a whole, and on the American the American public's health and welfare. And so why is gerrymandering such a disgusting thing for all of us to look at? It's an example of a cancer. Bryan is an oncologist. Bryan's entire career is to root out the rot that tries to take a healthy environment and kill it. And so when we hear that our family members have cancer, we look to the left, and we look to the right, and we try to find a doctor that can cure it. And we have one in the room with us today. He's decided to put his slice of the American dream on hold for the next year to try and protect our future and our freedoms through controlling the gerrymandering cancer that's taking over the Ohio state electorate. And so it's with pride and hope that I introduce my friend, Bryan Hambley.
How incredible is it that we have almost 200 people in Geauga County 10 months out from an election? This is inspiring to me. I know it's inspiring to all of us. Thank you for your work in being here. My name is Bryan Hambley. I'm a leukemia doctor in Cincinnati doing the most natural thing in the world, running for Secretary of State. And I know it is not the most common career path for a leukemia doctor, so I want to describe why I'm doing this. My wife Jan and I have had a recurrent conversation I imagine many of you have had. And it's about what comes next in American democracy. After the chaos, the bitterness, and the failed leadership, what comes next? What can all of us in this room do? Now, I'm reminded in my day job, everybody cares about the health of themselves and their communities. 2 years ago, I had a patient, young single mother from down near Portsmouth, goes to her local hospital with a nosebleed, only to be told she had leukemia, and she had to come to Cincinnati. 2 hours, by ambulance, sirens blaring. And when I walked into her room on the leukemia ward of our hospital in Cincinnati, this woman was scared. But she wasn't just scared of the leukemia. She was scared that her new high-deductible health plan, this woman had insurance, but a non-union job and a $10,000 out-of-pocket max, was going to leave her with co-pays too high to afford Christmas presents for her kids. She's afraid her insurance company was going to deny the chemo she needed because she'd had many friends where insurance had played the deny game. And she's afraid she'd spend the next 2 years driving back and forth to Cincinnati because all the local hospitals and clinics had either been consolidated down or closed entirely. They could have provided at least some of the care she needed. Those were her fears. The day she was diagnosed with leukemia. And I thought to myself, this woman's not describing Democratic fears or Republican fears. She was describing human fears. And when I think of what have our gerrymandered Republican Congress people in Ohio done to build a more secure future for that woman and the many people in Ohio like her, it's nothing. And it was worse than nothing in July when every Republican member of Congress from Ohio voted for a budget that is going to cut 500,000 Ohioans from their health care. Now some of you might wonder, what in the world's that got to do with Secretary of State? And I'll start by saying what the Secretary of State is supposed to do by the Ohio Constitution. There are 3 big jobs. Number 1, Secretary of State is supposed to draw fair districts when you go to vote for those Congress people. Number 2, Secretary of State is supposed to write honest ballot language when you go to vote on any constitutional amendment. And number 3, the Secretary of State is supposed to make it easy and fair for every Ohio citizen to vote. Anybody sign the anti-gerrymandering petition in 24? Wow, great group, Chair Carson. Yeah, I don't have to tell all of you, we have a Secretary of State in Ohio who for the last 7 years has doubled down on gerrymandering, disenfranchising millions of Ohioans. Democrats and Republicans alike are hurt by gerrymandering. We have a Secretary of State who now twice has used dishonest ballot language, of all things, putting his thumb on the scale so that he could get his way, rather than just let Ohio voters get their way. And we have a Secretary of State who every chance he gets makes it a little harder for people to vote, especially people he doesn't think are likely to vote for him. That's what we have. But if gathering together on a Saturday morning in January before a November election should be about anything, it should be about all of us imagining an Ohio where our districts are drawn not by the politicians who sit in those seats, but by an independent redistricting commission. This is not pie in the sky. Conservative states like Idaho do it. More progressive states like Ohio, like Michigan do it. We should do it here in Ohio. It's been a dry spell for Democrats in Ohio. We haven't won a race like this in 20 years. And some people ask, what makes me think we could build a team After 20 years, they could finally get over the hump. Traveling Ohio, I think people are looking for three things. Number one, people are looking for new voices in state government. We hear it everywhere we go. Number two, people are looking for a crystal clear anti-gerrymandering message. And number three, people are looking for work ethic and compassion, people who show up in every community. That's what I think we need to bring into the next 10 months. Thank you so much for being here. I am honored to be with you.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is great to be here. First, I would love to say thank you to all of the organizers who helped put this forum together. This is outstanding turnout, as Bryan said, on a Saturday morning. Here we are months and months before a November general election, and I think it speaks to what excites me most about 2026, and that is the enthusiasm that we see getting ready to take our state back and our country back. For those of you who do not know me, I am Allison Russo, state representative. I have a district down in the Franklin County area. And I want to say something real quick, that while I am starting my 8th year in the legislature, I never planned to run for public office. That was not part of the plan. I was a first-time candidate actually in 2018. And what I love being in front of this group, why this is important today, is because my entrance into actually getting involved in politics started with my indivisible group in Congressional District 15. In fact, that started right after the 2016 election, because on election night, my daughter, who's floating around in the back here, was only 6 weeks old in 2016. And she's my youngest of 3 kids. And on that night, I said I went from being an engaged and informed voter to making a promise to myself and to her that I would never again stay on the sidelines. And that is what connected me to Indivisible 15 in 2017, and eventually led me to say yes when I was asked to run for office as a first-time candidate in 2018. I did flip that seat in 2018, and we did it because we worked our tails off. We got out there, we talked to voters, 45,000 doors by the time that election was done. And we flipped a seat that was won by 20 points in 2016, and I won it by 5 points in 2018, because that is what happens when we show up, we do the work, and we have the conversations, and most importantly, we have good people running for office who are there to actually solve problems and get things done. I'm running for Secretary of State because I believe, number one, this is the most important statewide office if we want to have long-term sustained change in our state. I say you can lose the governor's seat, and this is true. You can lose the governor's seat and still win the Secretary of State seat and still actually have a fair shot to making some change in this state. That is how important this seat is. Its primary responsibility is to administer fair and free elections in this state, working with all 88 boards of elections. Experience matters. I'm going to tell you, Senator Smith told you the story of how we fought back the 60% threshold. Those attacks are happening day in and day out of the legislature. This year alone, 2025, we're in 26 now. In 2025 alone, there have been 52 bills introduced in the legislature to change voting. A few have been good, but a lot have been bad. That is the fight. It is a constant fight with the legislature. It is a constant fight to fight for resources for these elections. It is a constant fight against the constant attacks on voting rights. I have never seen a majority and Republicans in charge of this state who are more afraid of the power of your vote. They are afraid, they are terrified. And I will tell you, my front row seat for the last 8 years has shown me this. They will do everything in their power to rig the game. They will do everything in their power to change the rules and to ignore the rules. And you need experience. that I bring walking in on day one, who knows that fight, who has been in the trenches, who has had to strategize, who has had to understand every lever of power available to us, because we start from a disadvantage. But there is too much at stake. Our democracy is on the line. Our voting rights are on the line. Experience matters, and I will walk in on day one ready to do the job and ready to fight for you to take our state back. Thank you.
All right. It's a good thing we have an IT guy here today. Thank you, Bryan. Bryan is the IT guy for the Geauga County Democratic Party and a member of our executive committee, and I thank him for being here. I do want to introduce Tom Tagliamonte, the Lake County Chair. So Tom and I work together very well. He's pretty easy to get along with, and he listens to a lot of what I tell him to do, so it's really good. And I appreciate all his help for this event. He really did a lot of work, so thank you, Tom. You can come sit up front if you want. Okay. All right. These questions were submitted to the candidates ahead of time so that they could be prepared to answer them. Our first question is, as a candidate for Secretary of State, you both have stressed the need to fix gerrymandered districts in Ohio. Because the maps were approved with bipartisan support, no redistricting for Columbus legislators or congressional legislators will happen for several years. What are your plans to correct the gerrymandering situation, since these districts will be in effect for a while? All right, Bryan?
Want to alternate, or how do you want?
Yeah, we're going to alternate.
Great.
They'll have 2 minutes to answer, and 1 minute if there needs to be a clarification.
So I'll go first on the first question.
Yeah, first on the first question. Thank you.
I believe the only long-term solution to gerrymandering in Ohio is exactly what the League of Women Voters said in 2024. It is a constitutional amendment. The idea of winning elections every 10 years when we redistrict and getting rid of gerrymandering, it will not happen. We need a constitutional amendment. We need, if we win the Secretary of State's office in 2026, to put the exact League of Women Voters initiative back on the ballot in 2027, but with clear, honest ballot language. Because many of you in this room know the Secretary of State controls ballot language in Ohio. The ballot board is different than the redistricting commission. 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and the Secretary of State write the ballot language. That's why Frank LaRose, our current Secretary of State, was able to torpedo all of us on the Independent Commission in 2024. That's why if we win in 2026, it should be issue number 1 for the next Secretary of State. It is the only long-term solution to gerrymandering. I think Justice Jennifer Brunner, our last Democratic Secretary of State, had it exactly right. Compromising on gerrymandering was wrong in the past on the legislative districts. It was wrong in 2025 when we did it on the congressional districts. And for me, it just underscores that we need an independent commission that takes politicians of both parties out of the redistricting business. Thank you.
So first, let me say very clearly, the system is broken. Our current redistricting process is broken, the one that was passed in 2015 and 2018. It is broken. Frank LaRose and other Republicans who sat on that redistricting commission, who sit in the State House, they have exercised every lever of power to ensure that that system is broken. I would argue that it was actually designed to be broken when they agreed to the compromise when the language went in, because you have loopholes in the current process that you could drive a truck through. And I know that now, having sat through 7 rounds of redistricting as a member of the prior redistricting commission. It is broken. You should be pissed off about that. And Bryan is absolutely right. The only way to fix it is for the citizens to go back and come forward with another citizen-led initiative to change it and take politicians out of the process and have a citizen-led commission. That is the only solution. It will not be perfect, but it is a hell of a lot better than what we have now. But let me say this, the Secretary of State's role is fourfold. First, it's making sure that you as citizens, when you come back to the Secretary of State, you have a fair shot of actually getting across the finish line. And that means that the Secretary of State is actually going to be fair in certifying the signatures, because that can be manipulated, and we're seeing that right now in the state of Missouri. That the Secretary of State is now not going to weaponize the new powers that the legislature has now given to that office in terms of campaign finance, specifically as it relates to ballot initiatives. You were probably not paying attention when that happened. Third, it is making sure that there is clear language that does not intend to trick you so that you don't know what the hell you're voting on. And fourth, and most importantly, it is making sure that we have an election process that allows people to show up and have their voice heard. And that is the main job of the Secretary of State. Thank you.
Next question. What is your opinion on House Bill 293 that was recently signed into effect by Governor DeWine? And what would you do as Secretary of State to enable more absentee ballots to be counted? Allison, you're first.
Well, I spent the last couple of months before this bill was passed fighting this bill in the legislature because it was in front of the committee that I sit on. And again, let me emphasize, Senate Bill 293 is one of 52 bills just in this past year that have been introduced to change the way that we vote in the state, many of which have been anti-voter bills. And as was mentioned before, they did this during a period when our elections officials were trying to actually administer an election. So they had no opportunity to give input. In fact, the major amendment that they made to it, the day that it was voted out of committee and voted off the floor of the House, no election official had even seen it. The association had not seen it until I sent it to them, the amendment. That's how they saw it and had no opportunity to weigh in on it. And it was based on a lie. A lie that started with the president saying that mail-in ballots are full of fraud, and that was continued with Secretary LaRose when he came in front of our committee and pushed and advocated for this bill, although I did get him to say 3 times, election fraud in Ohio is exceedingly rare. This bill does many things, but most importantly what it is going to do is most disturbingly what it is going to do is throw out thousands of legally cast ballots here in the state of Ohio, because the intent is to reduce the power of your vote. And the intent is to reduce how your voice is heard. And I will promise you this, as Secretary of State, you will not have someone who goes in front of the legislature, where a lot of this work has to be done, and advocates for your voice to be diminished. I will be fighting back continually and using every lever of power I have, and the bully pulpit, and the light of the media, and the public to shine bright to make sure that you have the best advocate for voters in that office. Thank you.
Ohio's got a lot of big counties. My wife and I and our 2 kids live in Loveland, in far southern Warren County, a large county. And the county seat in Loveland is Lebanon. Neil Armstrong lived there for a while. It's about 40 minutes from our home to the Board of Elections office and the drop box. Nobody wants to drive an hour and 20 minutes round trip. Many of our rural counties have unreliable mail service where you don't know when you drop off your ballot in the mail, when is it going to arrive? Senate Bill 293 removes the grace period of those 4 days for people who put their ballot in the mail on time to allow the mail to do its thing. It is a solution in search of a problem. And Republicans have been doing this, and we know why. They're doing it because 5,000 to 15,000 Ohioans' votes would be eliminated each cycle if they got it through. And they think those 5,000 to 15,000 people are predominantly Democratic votes. That is not the kind of election law that we should have. What we need in this state is a policy where everyone knows that their vote will be counted, their vote will be respected, whether they live in a rural area with poor mail service or whether they live in an urban area. This state relies on its elections. We have absolutely free and fair elections in Ohio, and we have a Secretary of State that we need to acknowledge in Frank LaRose, who has cast aspersions on the validity of our elections and the work of our Board of Elections workers for his own political purposes. That is not what the role of the Secretary of State should be. Thanks very much.
So we want to remind everybody that we've got 3x5 cards we've been passing around. If you have a question for the two candidates, please write them down and pass them back to the two ladies that are collecting them so that we can have additional questions. If you need a card, raise your hand and they'll bring one to you. Question number 3. The current Secretary of State has issued directives that have direct impact on elections and the procedures from the local boards of elections that are required to be acted on within weeks or days of an upcoming election. Do you have an opinion on this practice? And if so, what would you do as far as issuing last-minute directives that affect elections and boards of election procedures? Brian.
Yep. In 2024, our Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, 2 months before the elections, changed the rules on people in Ohio and our Board of Elections officials, making it harder for people to drop off ballots. 2 months ahead of time. For Board of Elections workers who I've been meeting as I've traveled to 68 counties in this state, this is an incredibly onerous time. They're very busy. To have their heads spinning with the Secretary of State who keeps changing the rules right up until the election for his own political purposes, it doesn't make any sense. We need a Secretary of State who is committed to stable leadership. We used to have that. From 2006 to 2010, Justice Brunner was our last Democratic Secretary of State. I was meeting with a Board of Elections official in Zanesville. And in Zanesville, what this Board of Elections worker told me is that in 2008, during an election, it got very busy, and they had some procedural questions. And the elections lawyers at the Secretary of State's office were very busy. And so she got a personal call from Secretary of State Brunner answering a procedure question during that time. That's what we can have in Ohio. We need a Secretary of State who's dedicated to service, not dedicated to their own political ambition. Thanks.
So in my last 8 years working in the legislature and specifically being the House Minority Leader, I have had many opportunities to work with our elections officials across the state and the association that represents them. And there is one thing that I know for sure, and that is Frank LaRose has been the worst Secretary of State in our history. And part of that is because, number one, he doesn't know how to run an office. They have lost expertise in that office. Good luck, I'm sure we have some elections officials here, good luck trying to even find who you can call to ask the question to in that office because they have had so much turnover. And part of that has been because people are aging out. It has been underfunded. He's a bad leader of the office. And there has been tremendous inconsistency. And most importantly, a lack of respect and almost a lack of knowledge of what our election officials actually do, what is the election calendar that we have, and how it operates. And so what you will get from me and the Secretary of State is, number one, we are going to restore expertise back into that office because that is critically important. And number two, you are going to have a Secretary of State who actually understands what elections officials do, what their calendar is, and what their constraints are, including their resource constraints that they have. And that, I think, will go a long way in making sure that our boards of elections, our county boards of elections have consistency, have transparency, have predictability, so that we can have good, fair elections in this state.
Question number 4. Many boards of elections struggle with having sufficient funds to easily hold efficient elections. Do you understand the funding process for local boards of elections, and what would you do to facilitate every county board of elections having enough funds for equipment, staff, and an easily accessible location for the public to vote? I think you're first.
So I think first, before answering this question, I think many Ohioans do not realize that much of the funding to administer our elections actually comes from the local level. And it's often from your county commissioners. So election funding is very sensitive to any changes that happen for local government funding. So anytime that there are cuts from the state budget, that there are cuts from the federal budget, that directly impacts the ability of our local boards of elections to have the resources that they need to administer elections. There is funding that also comes from the state. It helps support the critical infrastructure, system upgrades, poll worker training, and the staff at the Secretary of State. But the vast majority of funding for our elections come from local governments. And so we are in a state right now where not only the needs of our boards of elections have increased because of things like cybersecurity threats, requirements, unfunded mandates that are coming from the legislature. Over the last 3 years alone, the number of special elections that we've had, 2 primaries, if you'll remember, that happened in 2022, issues, signatures that have to be certified, all of those things. So it is so important. I actually think this resource and funding issue is one of the biggest threats to the ability of Ohioans to have fair and free elections. Because I have talked to many counties across the state, and in some of our rural counties, they have said to me that they are looking at possibly a 60 to 65% cut in the funding that is coming from their county commissioners to administer the work of the Board of Elections. This is a huge issue. And so how do we address it? Number one, you need someone who knows the state budget process, who is going to be able to advocate for more state funding to relieve some of that pressure. And number two, there are also potential and have been funding from the federal government. That also has been drying up, and you need a Secretary of State who is actually advocating for that, and most importantly, advocating so that policies made in state budget decisions are not adversely affecting our county and local governments so that they do not have the money to fund these elections.
Anybody here a poll worker? Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm a poll worker in Warren County. And what I saw was that there were Democrats and Republicans who were showing up trying to make people get through on time, not stand in long lines, dedicated to counting those ballots accurately and to performing the long, hard work of democracy. They rely on county governments to fully fund the Board of Elections. For unfunded mandates, like changing the envelope for an absentee ballot that our Secretary of State really did, that costs a lot of board elections, including the one in Geauga County, money they didn't have budgeted. This doesn't make sense. We need a Secretary of State who advocates for full funding, and we need county governments to live up to that responsibility. I want to mention 2 other things, though. One, everyone in this room should know we have a Secretary of State in Frank LaRose who wasted $20 million in August of 2023 on a special election we didn't need, designed to help him win a Republican primary for United States Senate. Second, it doesn't have to be this way. Nonpartisan election law used to be doable. The Help America Vote Act was passed in 2002 with 92 senators, bipartisan. Ohio has received hundreds of millions of dollars for election integrity and training for poll workers from that fund. We need that kind of bipartisan politics back and a more nonpartisan Secretary of State.
Question 5. Please explain your position on drop boxes at voting location centers and what changes you would make as Secretary of State to enable more voters to vote.
I think about now, Allison and I are wishing there were a third candidate in this primary. Our voices are going to get hoarse. Ballot drop boxes are essential for people to be able to access the vote, especially in rural counties. My friend Nate in the back, he and I have been to Marietta 3 times. Anybody been to Marietta? Beautiful, beautiful river town. And Washington County is a big, long county. And from Marietta, the county seat, to Bartlett, on the far western part of Washington County, it's about a 35-minute drive. If you've got to drive from Bartlett to Marietta to drop off your ballot and back, hour and 10 minutes. Nobody in Ohio should have to drive more than 20 minutes to drop off their ballot, and nobody should ever stand in line more than 20 minutes to cast their ballot on election day. This is not a partisan issue. Nobody likes to stand in line. Nobody wants to drive over an hour round trip to drop off a ballot box. Our Secretary of State, by directive, limited the number of ballot boxes that you can have to 1 in a county. Limiting boards of elections in big counties, especially counties where the county seat isn't in the middle of the county. He also made it harder for people who are dropping off relative and loved ones' ballots by making people go inside to sign this extra paper attesting to that ballot. I think Ohioans want something different, and I think Ohioans of both parties don't like all of the extra hurdles that our Secretary of State has put between them and casting their ballot. Thanks.
So I don't think this will surprise you. I completely support more ballot drop boxes and early vote locations. I have advocated for that for years as I've been in the legislature. And Bryan is right. We had Frank LaRose who actively advocated by directive and limited that option for Ohio voters. The problem is now he also advocated to have that written into state law. And so the reality is we have state law that exists right now that limits the ability of any Secretary of State to change that. But let me say this, it does not limit the ability of the Secretary of State that if you as the voters decide that you want a voter rights bill to come before as a citizen-led initiative that expands that again, you'll get a fair shot at that with me as the Secretary of State. If you want a Secretary of State who is actually going to use the resources that we have available to get out and actually spend money on voter education and voter outreach so that people understand all the loops that they have to jump through now to have their vote cast and heard, you will have that in me, a Secretary of State. If you want a Secretary of State who knows how to go in front of this legislature and not only fight back and what they are trying to do, but is going to be an advocate for voters over and over to continue to have access to the ballot box and have convenient access to voting, you will have that in me as Secretary of State. No longer will you have the days of someone like Frank LaRose standing in front of this legislature and advocating for bills and policies that limit your voice at the ballot box. Thank you.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about voting with the Secretary of State's office. Another important aspect of the Secretary of State's office is that it's where you file your incorporation papers. If you have an LLC, if you have a business, there's a lot of things that are on the business side of the Secretary of State's office. So, is there anything you would change on the business services process the Secretary of State handles? Or is there anything you would do to make that process easier for people to set up businesses in the state of Ohio? I think you're first.
Yeah. So first of all, let me say, this issue of business services is very important that the Secretary of State does. It's the less sexy part of the job, so if you need a bathroom break, now is your time. Listen, business services is critical to growing and developing new business in our state. And the Secretary of State is the first entrance for many of these businesses who are coming in to register, or associations or corporations. The reason that it's also, we talked about the funding question, is it also represents about 35% of the funding for the Secretary of State's office and operations. And that is collected through these fees that are assessed for businesses when they come and they register in the state. So we have to be very careful about any changes that are made to fee structures, because they have a direct impact on the ability to operate our elections here in the state of Ohio. The number one thing that I hear from small businesses, as my time as a state representative working on constituent services, as well as since I've started on this campaign trail, most businesses fail within the first year, especially if you're a small business or you're a sole proprietorship. You fail within the first year of operations. And so I think we have a tremendous opportunity in the Secretary of State's office to create a pathway to connecting these new businesses when they come in the front door to the services that other agencies and departments within the state provide to support our new businesses, because many new business owners don't know that those services and resources exist. And so if we want more businesses to succeed, small businesses, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, to increase the revenue and economic activity of the state, this part of the job is extremely important, and we can do a lot better than what we're doing now.
Anybody here own or operate a small business? Well, good. My parents are small farmers. I grew up on a produce farm. They do farmers markets. And they didn't earn over $25,000 a year until I was in high school. Every dollar matters. For too long, we have allowed the Republicans to take first swipe at being the small business party. We should be the party of small business. We should make Ohio the most friendly place in the country to start a small business. That's why I'm proud that we did announce, the first of any of the 4 candidates running for Secretary of State, a policy on this. And we think we should reduce the new business filing fee by 25%. It is less than 10% of the budget of $50 to $70 million a year. It would do 2 things. One, if you're starting a small business and you're worried about the knick-knack fees that you get buried under, it's a help. Number 2, as a counter to what Frank LaRose did with wasting $20 million on a special election that should have been in his budget for his Senate campaign, we need to show we are not a corrupt party. We need to show we will put small businesses first, and that we will be a counter to what Frank LaRose has done to that office. That's why I think we start there. Thank you.
Allison Russo requested a follow-up for 1 minute.
I would like to respond to this, because I think this sounds like a really great idea, but we are talking about a 10% cut to the Secretary of State's budget. And we just talked about the resource issues that we have right now, which I think is the biggest threat to election integrity in our state at the moment, is the lack of resources. 10% is not an insignificant amount. And with respect, a lot of the businesses that are registering, by the way, and paying these fees, some of them are doing things like buying up houses in neighborhoods and turning them into rental income or other things that are driving up the cost of housing in our local communities. They're doing things like using repeated registration over and over to misclassify workers and commit wage theft. So while this sounds like a great idea, by the way, our business fees are less than our surrounding states, neighbors in surrounding states. While this sounds like a great idea, it has real implications that I think are actually harmful, and that we should put a little bit more thought into how do we better support small businesses without sacrificing our ability to conduct fair and free elections in this state.
Good people can have disagreements, and I disagree on this one. $4.7 million, that's what it would cost to show small businesses in Ohio that we mean business. $4.7 million in a $70 million budget that we've had a Republican Secretary of State torpedo with a $20 million waste of money. That is what we're talking about. Second, politically in Ohio, Democrats have been on their heels for far too long. We have not taken the fight to Republicans. We need to be the party that stands up and fights for people. I think a lot of communities are hurting in Ohio. Driving around this past year, I've seen it. They are looking for someone who is willing to fight for them. And I think if we meet that moment, that is how a Democrat wins statewide in Ohio.
So the Republican candidate for Secretary of State is Robert Sprague. And he has indicated that he wants to go to paper ballots only for voting in elections. And that he also wants to have a secondary bipartisan audit after voting to check that the bipartisan chain and the bipartisan work of the Board of Election, local Board of Elections, was done correctly. This all sounds like a scheme to slow the process from start to finish. Do you have an opinion?
I think we have to start by speaking plainly to our friends and our family members who don't spend as much time thinking about politics as many of us in this room. Why is Robert Sprague doing this? We know he is playing to the right wing of the Republican base. Paper ballots. We have over 99.99% accuracy when these audits are done. We need to make sure we are supporting our Board of Elections workers. We are validating the work they do is good and accurate, and that the poll workers who spend those long 14-hour days at the polls, that they don't feel like they have a Secretary of State who is using their work for their own political ends. We need to contrast, and we need to speak plainly about why in the world the Republicans are talking like this. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with this. This is the sustained attack that we have in trust in our election process. The reality is, we do have paper ballots. You get them with every single voting machine that is used in the state of Ohio. You get a roll, or some of you actually get something printed out and you feed it into a feeder. That's how my election machines are, voting machines are in Franklin County. Also, one of the reasons that Republicans like to attack trust in our elections is because it takes too long to know what the results are. The results change after absentee mail-in ballots come in. How long do they think it is going to take to hand count paper ballots? Let's just for a minute think about a county like Franklin County, or Cuyahoga County, or Hamilton County. We are talking about days counting paper ballots. And not to mention the amount of human mistake that gets introduced into that process because we have now taken technology back decades. And so I am opposed to these attacks, but I think it speaks to a larger issue, and that is restoring trust and transparency back to this office. I hear so much from elections officials. They wish that they knew, that legislators and the public knew more about what they do and what the process is. And we need a Secretary of State who is actually going to open up that process, create transparency, so that people have their trust in our elections restored.
So we're getting to audience questions now, so if you've got some, please pass it forward. What can the Secretary of State do to highlight the problems of money in politics, where candidates get their money from, etc., etc.?
I think it's you.
Oh, me?
You, okay.
Because we end up going 2 in a row each time, right?
Okay. Back and forth.
Yeah. So first of all, let me say that one of the other important jobs that the Secretary of State does is it now actually oversees the campaign finance piece of our candidates and our issues, etc. In fact, we previously had a bipartisan commission, the Ohio Elections Commission, that called balls and strikes when there were violations in this process. That power has now, number one, in this last budget just 6 months ago, dissolved. The Republicans dissolved that election commission in spite of us having the largest public corruption scandal in our state's history that primarily involved misdeeds with campaign finance, and it now all essentially falls under the Secretary of State, which means that that person could, in their role of calling balls and strikes and who violates and who doesn't, can use it as a political weapon. And I think it is one of the scariest potential avenues for abuse of power of this office. When I have been in the legislature, before I became the House Minority Leader, I actually introduced legislation, the Anti-Corruption Act, that was based on previous legislators to reform and open up, especially for these dark money groups, because that is where the bulk of this money is coming from in our state elections and in scandals like the House Bill 6. We need more transparency in that. And we have some constraints because of a very unfortunate Supreme Court decision, but there are ways that the Secretary of State can both be fair in going after people who are not following the rules, even if it comes from our own party, but also making sure that we set up systems to be as transparent as possible in these campaign finance reports and advocating continually to reform the ethics and the rules, especially around these dark money groups that are operating here in the state of Ohio.
The most important thing we can do to get dark money out of our politics is elect people who don't take it. I have never taken corporate PAC money. I will never take corporate PAC money. I think it is an undermining feature in our democracy. It is critical that Democrats elect people who can say that clearly to people across Ohio. Folks are tired of having candidates that take large donations from corporate PACs. It is essential when we're casting our vote. Thank you.
That was too quick. Given the attempt of voter suppression, shouldn't there be a concerted effort to vote in person, regardless if it causes long lines? I have an opinion.
Sure. I don't think we need to let the Republicans dominate the discussion on long lines. We can do this. We can expand early vote. We can have more days where people vote. I work with a lot of nurses who work 6 to 6 shifts. It's tough to get to restricted hour early vote days. We need to make sure that voting is accessible no matter your profession, no matter how you want to cast your ballot. And yes, voting by mail is essential, not just for nurses who might be working 12-hour shifts. We met with a group called Miss Wheelchair, a disability advocacy group in Ohio. And one of the most important things for them was that they could access early voting, vote by mail, so that they didn't have to go through the hurdles and the barriers of getting to a polling place. I believe this is why Republicans are so focused on limiting the ability of vote by mail. They know the folks who are likely to use it, and they know that they're not likely to vote for them. This is naked partisanship. We need a less partisan Secretary of State. Thanks.
So I think that limiting voting to in-person only is voter suppression. Long lines is voter suppression. And what this does is it punishes certain groups of people. As Bryan said, certainly those with disabilities. It also punishes our older voters who are sometimes homebound, or just simply who like to get that ballot in the mail, and as they're drinking coffee, or maybe a glass of wine, be able to go through the candidates and issues and do the research and fill it out on their own time. And they should be allowed to do that. They've earned that. But it also punishes our students. I am the mom of a freshman college student who happens to be out of state. That is the only way that he is able to access the ballot. He and many other Ohio college students or people who are serving overseas or working overseas, in-person voting and restricting, it is voter suppression. And it only benefits one party because their goal is to reduce the number of people who have a voice at the ballot.
In the 2024 election, Frank LaRose purged 100,000 voters from the voter rolls. We understand purging is a process that is mandated by law. How would you address this or modify it to prevent any partisan impact?
Is that me? Sorry. We'll get this right, buddy. Well, a couple of things. Let me start by saying maintaining accurate voter rolls is incredibly important. There are reasons that people are removed from the voter rolls, they move out of state, they die, etc. What Frank LaRose has also done in terms of purging voters is he has set up a process, which now has been affirmed in rules by the legislature, that simply because you did not participate in the elections, you are now eligible to be purged. And I always remind people, voting is not a privilege, it is a right. It is a constitutional right, and we should treat it as such. The other thing that he did that creates a ton of mistakes in this purge process that have been identified many times over the years is he actually removed us from one of the primary ways that we were able to check if voters were still eligible in our state, and that was the ERIC system. He removed us from that process and likes to brag that he now put us in this multi-state, which mostly is Republicans who also have left that system. So now we have a system that is fraught with errors. And then on top of that, Senate Bill 293 that we talked about earlier now creates other mismatch opportunities when there are mismatches with the BMV, the Social Security Administration, that now will force more people to vote provisionally on election day, which is going to increase the number of ballots that are thrown off. So it's not just about purging your record, it's now about, are you going to be able to cast an actual ballot or a provisional ballot on election day and have not only your vote not count, but oh, by the way, if you don't get it fixed, which may or may not be your error, your voter registration is canceled. That is what we are operating under now, and so we need a Secretary of State who is actually going to identify actively, proactively those issues and advocate for every single voter to remain eligible if they are eligible and to be able to cast their vote fairly and freely on election day. Thank you.
Not going to be any disagreement on this one. And Allison, I think you're exactly right. We need to tell the story of why Frank LaRose left the ERIC system. A right-wing website posted a comment that the ERIC system, where states would collaborate, share information, so when you move from Ohio to California, you could only be registered in one state. It's how most of us think it works already. It was working really well with Democratic and Republican states. But a right-wing website posted a comment saying that this was a liberal conspiracy. And Frank LaRose was worried about the right flank of the Republican Party when he ran for the United States Senate. And so he pulled us out of the most effective way to prevent voter fraud in Ohio. So we should not take a back seat on the discussion of having updated, accurate voter rolls or on preventing voter fraud to Republicans. They have eliminated one of our best tools against it. The next Secretary of State should put us back in. Thank you.
Here's a tough one. I wish I knew who wrote it. How would you have voted in October of 2025 on the Ohio Redistricting Commission issue for congressional maps?
I would have voted no. Gerrymandering is wrong. Gerrymandering limits all of our ability to affect our representatives. When gerrymandering happens, it's not about what political party scores points or gets this seat or that seat. This is about communities. You know, if you live in the area south of Toledo, with those new districts that gerrymander Congresswoman Capter into a much more difficult district, you lost. If you live in the northern part of Hamilton County, a place called Lincoln Heights, 97% African American in northern Hamilton County, it got gerrymandered into Warren Davidson's district that is mostly farmland to the west and north of Dayton. You lost the opportunity to have a representative in Congress who was your voice. Gerrymandering is wrong. It has been wrong politically for Democrats. It is wrong strategically for Democrats. It is essential that issue number one for our next Secretary of State is to move us to an independent redistricting commission to take politicians of both parties out of this forever.
So let me start by saying, you should be pissed off by the congressional districts that were passed in October. They are not what the citizens voted for. They are not what the citizens wanted. They are not fair. You should be pissed off about it. But you should be really pissed off about the fact that we have a broken process that continues to have people on the Redistricting Commission, and specifically I'm going to talk about the majority on the Redistricting Commission, who continues to violate the rules and take advantage of every single loophole that is available so that it's not actually a process. Here's what I know from serving on the Redistricting Commission. You don't have the choice between a good and a bad option. You're choosing between two really bad options. And so I'm going to say to you, I'm not going to judge what the two members, the two Democrats specifically did and how they voted, because I know that they did not have a good, fair, honest process, and those were two really crappy decisions that they had to choose between. But what I will tell you is that, again, this demonstrates that if we continue to let these Republican politicians hold the pen in this process, they will continue to draw worse and worse and worse districts. And it is why we have to remove politicians from the process. And as Bryan said, absolutely citizens should go back to the ballot to try to establish a citizen-led commission. And with me as Secretary of State, you will have a fair shot when that initiative comes before the Secretary of State to have the signature certified, to make sure that you are not punished because of campaign finance and they want to freeze, the Secretary of State wants to freeze the accounts to stop the ballot initiative, that you want to have honest language, and most importantly, that people actually have access to cast their vote and have their voice heard.
Okay, so right now, what I want to say is that we are going to have our candidates do their wrap-up, and then we are going to hear from John Kulowitz, our candidate for Ohio Attorney General. I have about 6 questions here that have to do with the rule of law and legislation, and I think that our candidate for Ohio Attorney General is better equipped to answer those questions, and his job as Attorney General would be more appropriate than Secretary of State. So, Bryan, because you went first, do you want Allison to? Okay, all right.
Whatever you guys want to do. Either way.
Doesn't matter to me.
How many
Okay.
minutes for the wrap up?
All right.
How many minutes?
3 minutes.
3? Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, wait, I have one more question. I'm sorry.
One more question.
Please tell us why you would be the best candidate to be elected Secretary of State and how you think you can win in November if you win the primary.
And this is not to wrap up, this is a question.
This is a question.
Great.
I forgot it.
Over the last 12 months, I've traveled around Ohio. I've been to 68 counties. This is our 237th event this morning. There is no replacing work ethic for a Democrat trying to win in Ohio. I believe, after all those discussions and listening more than talking, that Democrats, independents, and yes, even some Republicans who are tired of it, are looking for three things. I think people are looking for new voices in our state government. People are tired of being led down by politicians who are short-sighted. Number two, I think people in Ohio are tired of not being communicated with on a human level. And Democrats, sometimes we talk much too far in policy jargon and bill number XYZ. We need to make sure in this election we are putting the needs of people in Ohio front and center. And we need to be talking about people in a human level. And the last thing I'll say, somebody told me about 2 weeks into this campaign, it's tough to convince somebody to vote for you if they don't think you like them. And for right reasons or wrong reasons, I think a lot of people in Ohio don't think the average Democrat likes them. We need this campaign to be about communicating. We like them. We care about people and their communities. We care that their communities and their families can thrive. That has to be at the center of our message in 2026. It is the only way we break a 20-year dry spell. Thanks.
So I believe that I can win this race because I'm battle tested and I have the experience. And here's the reality. I agree with you that we need new voices in this process, but the Secretary of State's office is too important. It is too important. It is too critical for our success moving forward. And we need someone who is going to walk in on day one with that experience and understanding how to use that experience to get things done and is not going to be on a learning curve. I too have been traveling around the state for the last 8 years. I'm not just showing up this year on the campaign trail. I've been doing it for years as a member of the House, as the House Minority Leader, sometimes the only Democrat that would say yes when rural counties would invite a Democrat to come and give an update on what is happening at the State House and what they can do and how they can advocate. I was often the only one that would say yes and show up. So this isn't the first time. Yes, I started campaigning in August because I had a job to do in the legislature. And that was to get a budget across the finish line, try to protect fair school funding, try to protect funding for Medicaid, try to protect funding for childcare. But when I stepped on that campaign trail, I made a promise that I was going to show up in as many communities as possible because I understand the value of talking to people. And I didn't just show up in August. I've been showing up for years. I've been in the trenches for years, doing the fight and doing the work. And no one will outwork me going into the general election. I can guarantee you Robert Sprague will not outwork Allison Russo because I'm not afraid to talk in places where I am uncomfortable. And that is a fact, and that's what we have to do as Democrats to win these races.
All right, closing statements.
Now we got it.
Now we got it. 3 minutes.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your dedication to our democracy. I was out in Carroll County, not too far from here, a few months back, and we did an unusual house party. It was a house party at a mobile home park that backed up to a pig farm. And there's not a lot of political things in this area. And one of the things that the folks who showed up in Carroll County said was nobody ever shows up. Thanks for being here. You know, Democrats don't show up because they think there are no Democrats in Carroll County. Republicans don't show up because they take everybody in Carroll County for granted. That is a political opportunity. The Republicans are going to nominate Robert Sprague, our state treasurer. And we have to envision what is the matchup we want. I believe we should put up against a career politician in Robert Sprague, an outsider leukemia doctor. We can have a contrast between Robert Sprague, who at every turn has supported gerrymandering. We can contrast it with someone who will never vote for gerrymandering. We can contrast with Robert Sprague, someone who's willing to take big corporate PAC money and someone who never will. We need that contrast. If we win, it's not going to be by much. This is going to be a very close election. I believe we can win if we go everywhere and paint the exact right contrast to what the Republicans are offering the people of Ohio. Thank you for that, and thank you for being here.
You know, something that I learned as we were in the fight against that August special election, which, by the way, that $20 million was used to fund the August special election, not a primary, so I do want to clarify that. But here's something that we learned in that fight. And as I was battling on the floor, keeping our members there until 6:15 in the morning, as we made sure that their selection for House Speaker was upended so that they were in chaos for the first few months of that General Assembly, so that we were able to form an actual coalition that could beat it back. What we understood and what became very clear to us is that people, all people, Republican, Democrat, Independent, they do not appreciate when people in power overstep their bounds. And if no other lesson from that August special election emerges, or the issue wins that we had with reproductive rights or legalization of cannabis, it is that people want a government that is responsive to them, not a government that is selected by politicians who just want to hold on to their power. And so the person that has been in the trenches and has learned to fight those fights and show up and deliver that message has been me. Yes, there will be a contrast with Robert Sprague, and it is in a strong woman who is not afraid to go toe-to-toe and fight the Republicans head-on. Because I will tell you, they are terrified that I am running for this seat, because they know that I am someone who is not going to let them get by with anything, because that is the reputation that I have developed in Columbus. Because I'm someone who actually knows the process and knows how to shine a light on what they are doing, and knows how to pull every lever of power where I can to either slow them down or fight them back. And that experience matters. And I believe that Ohioans do respect that experience. And so that is why I ask for your support in this primary election. We have too much at stake. Our democracy is on the line. Your voting rights are on the line. Everything that you care about in our communities is on the line. And so I would appreciate your support. Thank you, and thank you for having us here today. Thank you.
Want to shake hands? Thank you.